A USS George Washington Carrier moved toward Russian territory. 80,000 tons of steel cutting a clean line through calm water. And all of a sudden, the radar tone changed. New ships appeared on the screen, 5 of them, coming from different directions but clearly coordinated. But this is not just an alarm, at least not yet. So what was it? Buckle up and let's find out. 5 unknown ships with no identification signals or commercial markings but just clean military profiles began moving at 23 knots, then faster at 25 knots towards the USS Carrier. This time, everyone on the Washington began to feel that something was off. A small vibration through the floor. The ship's systems began shifting into a higher state of readiness. Not battle stations in particular, but not normal cruising either, just something in between. The captain kept his voice calm, instructing to log the contacts and maintain course straight ahead as it had been going. Down below, sailors stopped what they were doing for a second. The feeling was familiar, but it was enough to let them know something serious was about to happen. Then 5 unidentified surface ships appear from multiple directions, with target precision toward the USS Carrier. Immediately, cameras zoom in on the ships as they come into view. Long gray hulls, sharp bows which were definitely military, but with no flags were visible yet. The bridge tries to make radio contact, first in English, then in Russian, but there was no response. Instead, the ships kept coming closer, 20 miles away, 18 and then 16 knots closer. The computer kept calculating how close they'll get as the number kept dropping. Then all of a sudden, something different happened. The 5 ships weren't just coming toward the carrier anymore. They were spreading out, adjusting their positions, forming an arc in front of the carrier's path. And that's not even what makes this crazy. They were not trying to surround the carrier, they were trying to block it. The lead Russian ship turned slightly left, another one dropped back half a mile, making the arc wider. 2 others held steady on the sides. From above, it would look like a gate slowly closing across the carrier's path, like they were building a barrier. The computer on the USS Carrier updated again, closest approach now 4.3 miles. Now here's the thing, if the carrier kept going straight, it would pass right through the middle of this formation. And if the carrier turned to avoid them, the Russian ships win as it means they force the Americans to change course. So in simple terms, forcing a US aircraft carrier to change course without firing a shot? That's strategic victory. Another radio call was made to the Russian ships, but there was no response. At that range, there was no doubt they received the transmission. The silence was intentional. As the distance closed, onboard cameras provided a clearer view. Hull numbers became visible. These were not patrol vessels or ships that had wandered off course. They were military warships, positioned precisely where they intended to be. On the flight deck, wind moved across the chains securing the aircraft. The carrier made no change in speed or direction. It continued forward on the same heading, steady and deliberately. On the other hand, the Russian ships didn't break their blocking position, but narrowed the corridor the carrier could pass through. Now here's what this act implies. If the Russian ships crossed directly in front of the USS Carrier, it would force the carrier to react immediately, but narrowing the corridor invites the carrier to react without forcing it. At 3.8 miles, one Russian ship moves closer than the others. Its weight gets bigger as it increases speed by 2 knots. Although it was a small adjustment, the sensors on the USS Washington catch it immediately. Inside the combat center, analysts watch the electronic signals. The Russian ships were only using the bare minimum, just enough radar to navigate and stay coordinated. No weapons targeting or fire control systems active. They were staying just below the line that would make this a direct threat. Then 4 miles close to 3.5 miles. One Russian ship on the starboard side altered course, its bow angling inward just enough to register. The move stayed within international collision rules, but only barely. It was a calculated adjustment, meant to send a signal without crossing a line. On the navigation displays, the carrier's projected track now threaded through a narrowing gap between the ships. The margin was thin. At this range, barely enough was the difference between control and crisis. The Russian formation tightened again, then froze in place. The maneuver was complete. The corridor was set. This was the moment of decision. From the outside, the scene looked calm. No visible weapons, no sudden acceleration. But inside the carrier, the situation was anything but routine. Sensors were fully active. Cameras recorded every movement. Radar, infrared, and electronic systems captured every signal and course change in real time. Every second, every choice was being logged, because if something went wrong, this would be the moment everything traced back to. By 5:30 in the morning, the distance had closed to 3 miles. At this range, crew members on the other ships were visible to the naked eye. Their engines could be heard through the water. The distance stopped closing, not because the Russian ships pulled away, but because the carrier kept moving forward without changing course. That steady movement forced a decision. The formation either had to close completely or open just enough to let the carrier pass. So the Russians had to choose. The ships stayed in formation, but the precision began to slip. One vessel lagged by a few seconds, another corrected too sharply, then eased back. The changes were almost invisible, but the carrier's systems detected every movement. At 2.9 miles, a helicopter takes off from the carrier's deck, hovering and moving slowly as it records everything happening. The helicopter stayed well clear of the Russian ship's airspace, but its sensors pointed right at them, recording with infrared cameras that tracked the heat from their engines and exhaust. Everything was being documented. Now the Russians had to decide. One of the ships adjusted course again, its bow turning outward by just a few degrees. It was a small move, but it opened the gap. Another ship followed. The line started to break. The American response wasn't loud or aggressive. There were no warnings, no threats. The carrier didn't turn. It just kept going and recorded everything. The Russian ships stayed nearby, still watching, but the block was gone. They were close enough to see clearly, but no longer in a position to force the carrier off course. The carrier moved through the space they tried to deny, slow, calm, and steady. At about 2.5 miles, the water behind the ships changed. One Russian vessel slowed slightly, another kept its speed but drifted farther away. But the Russians miscalculated something and forgot that pressure actually works both ways. By 5:36, the USS Carrier ship didn't stop watching as they kept sailing straight. Now approaching closer at 2.2 miles, the watch team kept watching, not batting an eyelid. From the outside, the formation no longer looked tight. One ship drifted ahead, another held its position a moment too long before correcting. Then, something changed. A ship on the left made a sharper turn than before, not aggressive, but sudden enough to matter. The captain watched it on the screen and didn't react right away. He waited. When the carrier didn't respond, the Russian ship steadied, then slowly eased back. Its wake shrank as it reduced speed. The others followed, adjusting more slowly now. The block was over. At just under 2 miles, the ships opened up space between each other. The arc broke apart, and the formation turned into individual tracks. And for a moment, it felt like the calm before a storm that could have erupted in an instant. Then, at almost 6 a.m., the 5 Russian warships were still on radar, but no longer in the carrier's path. They trailed at a distance now, spreading out wider, watching but not interfering. Inside the combat center, the team confirmed what the screen showed. The carrier kept going, steady and unshaken. Below decks, systems returned to normal. Warning lights flipped from yellow back to green. The helicopter finished its last circle and touched down smoothly. Mission complete, not because anything happened, but because nothing escalated. Every move, every decision, every second was recorded. The Russian ships held their distance a little longer, then drifted even farther apart. One edged outward, another slowed. The formation broke apart completely, no longer acting as one. From the outside, it might look like nothing happened. 5 ships approached, 5 ships moved away, 2 groups of steel passed each other without touching. But in the official logs, in the recordings, the story was different. The USS George Washington kept sailing. Behind, the Russian ships stayed visible for a while, then faded into the distance one by one. By the time the last Russian ship disappeared from radar, the carrier had already moved on. So what do you think? Was this a probe, a pressure test, or a calculated attempt to force a mistake? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.